Well, like I was saying before, Charles and Ian, I want to extend a really warm welcome to both of you because you were both such an integral part of the beginnings of this podcast when it was called Unlearn and Rewild. Charles being the third episode that we recorded, and the Sacred Economics video was really what sparked this kind of enticement into your work, Charles. So I want to say to both of you, Ian and Charles, thank you so much for being on the show, and this really feels full circle to have you both on here today.
Cool. Happy to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So in 2011, Charles, you wrote Sacred Economics, which, quote, traces the history of money from ancient gift economies to modern capitalism, revealing how the money system has contributed to alienation, competition, and scarcity, destroyed community, and necessitated endless growth, end quote. And while demonstrating how these trends have reached their extreme, Charles, you advocate that in their collapse, we actually have the opportunity to transition to a more connected, respectful, and sustainable way of living. Now, in 2012, Ian, you created such a powerful, beautiful 12-minute film inspired by the book. And this video has been viewed almost 1 million times on YouTube and inspired so many, including myself. And so this year, Ian, you have now embarked on an endeavor to update the film. So I'd really love to begin this conversation by asking you each a little bit about the motivation behind Sacred Economics, as well as the impact and relevancy over the years.
Sure. I might as well go first. Basically, the reason that I got interested in the topic was that any problem that I examined in the world usually ended up having something to do with money. If you ask, why are oil companies fracking and digging the tar sands or something like that, or why are we overthrowing the government of Venezuela, or you get down to the reason that there's money to be made by doing this. So I felt like it was this inescapable topic, whether I was looking at systems or even spirituality. Like, you can't ignore money. So I just began investigating money and why should it be a force for evil when it's fundamentally just an agreement among human beings about what's valuable and how to conduct transactions. Like, why should it be this evil, destructive power? And does it have to be that way? So I kind of went to the base level and thought, yeah, I'll just rethink money from the ground up and take nothing for granted about what it is or what it can be. And I drew a lot on political economy and economics. So it's not just pure speculation. But yeah, that was the genesis of the book. And I feel like, actually, I probably should update the book too. I wrote it actually 2008, 2009, 2010. Then it was published in 2011. So I wrote it during the midst of the financial crisis and the Great Recession. So some of the things are actually becoming even more relevant today, but some of them need to be updated a bit. But yeah, the basic dynamics of the economic system have not changed, but only intensified. So I don't know, is that enough information to start with?
That's a wonderful place to start. And I absolutely agree that this economic situation we're entangled in has definitely intensified. Before we move on, Ian, I'd love to open up this topic to you as well.
Thanks. Yeah, at the time I had actually come across Charles's work initially through The Ascent of Humanity. I actually remember the very specific moment when I was at home at the time. I think it was maybe midsummer, and I just gotten home from the grocery store, and I was unpacked the groceries, and I had one of those mesh bags that they constantly tell you to bring, so you're not using plastic bags. And I remember going to the closet after I'd unpacked the groceries, and I put the bag into a bag of reusable bags that I had that was now overflowing. And there was something in that moment that like just hit me of what in some ways that represented the solution to the ongoing environmental crisis was, well, we just got to reuse, or these kind of consumer solutions. seemed to be such a drop in the bucket when here I was, stacking a bag with all of the solutions were overflowing. In this case, in the reusable bag. And I remember I went to the web just sort of in a daze, actually, and a friend had just posted a link to a chapter from Ascent of Humanity that I'd never heard of Charles before or the book. And in the line, I can't remember the exact paragraph it was, though, but it really spoke to this. It was something, I think he's quoting Audre Lorde saying, the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. And that cued me to Charles's work. I ordered the book pretty quick after and read through that, and it certainly was deeply moving to me. And so actually, I think we did do an interview, I think written at the time for an online magazine that I was editor of. Then later when Sacred Economics came out, that was such a important articulation, I felt, of the prism of money and how that itself was, so much was reflected within that prism about, the current story that powered modern civilization. And there was, in the closing chapters of that book, there was something along the lines of Charles saying, if you had surplus of some kind or the capacity to invest, that, we are in a time where the best investment you can make is in community or in this transitional shift. And so for me, I remember lying in bed and I finished the book at that time, and I just had a flash and I got up and I think I messaged Charles like 2:00 in the morning. I just said, hey, can we hop on a Skype call? And soon after we were talking, and I just asked, I was like, could I come and make a film about the book, or at least some of the most, pressing ideas? And Charles, fairly quick, said, sure. And, pretty soon after I'd booked a ticket and flew out there and stayed with Charles for, I think it was about 4 or 5 days with, him and his family. And it was very gracious of them to do so. And during that time, I collected footage. That's when the main interview was done. And then I was also at the time working on another film, though, like alongside of it, which eventually became Occupy Love, directed by Velko Ripper. And so those two were wove together in that Charles, we were able to go to Occupy Wall Street, right, which burst onto the scene right around that time. And I think that there was something in, those things colliding. Like Charles had been on to the money thing, since the crash, and like the Occupy itself was like the delayed reaction to the fact that it didn't seem like anything had happened in the economic system. None of the, big wigs had gone to jail, or nothing had really changed. And so Occupy was like the kind of frustration mounting, but also the imagination of the time, bursting on the scene. And so that film, for me, I guess, really became a way of trying to transmit even more than the ideas per se, but I really appreciate how Charles laid out so many of the sort of viable ideas. Like they're not just like hypothetical. A lot of them are examples of actual, things that had been tried before and had worked in different ways. But for me, the transmission that I was attempting to do through film was really like a type of frequency of, I don't know what to call it, like possibility or imagination, creativity, that it could be otherwise. And in that sense, I was grateful that that seemed to be the case by what it evoked in others, this sort of mimetic detonation that provided a new possibility.
Yeah, I think I just want to add a little bit. I think that the film works really well on an emotional level to convey a certain frequency, if you want to call it that, it underlies the concrete proposals and the information. Mm-hmm. But the book, I always pay a lot of attention to the language, to the cadence. I mean, really anything I write is a vehicle for love. Mm. My secret agenda is to make people feel better about themselves and more willing to live in the gift. So, and to carry more peace with them. So the film, I think, maybe even better than the book, conveys that vibration. So much so that people will watch the film and they won't be able to even say really what any of the content was. Mm-hmm. But I hope it's not just a momentary emotional high that they get. I hope that it actually seeds some kind of process inside of people and opens them up to a different way of seeing the world. But I know that because it has a strong emotional impact, the film, the first version of it, is used for these pyramid schemes. Fractals is the latest one. But there's been other ones too, where you have people in your fractal and they each give you $5,000, and then when they go, they can start a piece of it, and then everyone gives them $5,000, and it's a classic pyramid scheme. But they use sacred economics on their website and try to establish an association between that and my work. And I think that the reason that they do that is because it does have such a strong emotional resonance and calls people toward a connection to a future world that really resonates in the heart. It's like there's part of us that knows that economics doesn't have to be this cutthroat war of each against all, but that it can be cooperation and co-creation and generosity and like this part of ourselves that is so narrowly confined in modern society desperately wants expression. And that yearning for a future world, this possibility, it's what draws people to the film and the book, and it's also what makes people susceptible to manipulation.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk more about manipulation and boundaries when it comes to working with money, whether intentionally or selfishly. I think it can come up in many ways because of our conditioning. But before we dive into that topic, I want to also just kind of start foundationally again with the economic system. And it's really interesting how Occupy Wall Street, in a sense, even brought the three of us together, because I was there. I started the Environmental Solidarity Working Group and was really drawn into this work through the madness of this economic system, and then found both of your work. So it's really incredible. And just looking at the economic system in which we currently operate in is, it's one of domination and deception and separation. And many of us have been negligent when it comes to examining what features are inherently built into the money system. Sacred economics points out that both scarcity and growth, despite how contradictory this sounds, are permanent features of our money system. So I really would like if you could elaborate, both of you even, on more of how the nature of money is scarcity and why it is imperative that we truly create new monetary systems rather than simply just changing our attitudes around money from scarcity to abundance.
Ian, do you want to go for that? Or I can do that question in my sleep.
How about maybe I have one piece that I could add, but I would love if you started.
Yeah, so there's various New Age teachings that tell us money is just an energy, and it's our attitudes about money that are important. And if you change your attitude away from scarcity and toward abundance, then you will enjoy abundance in your life, and so on. But that is not universally possible in our current system. Just as if you were playing a game of musical chairs, and there's 9 chairs and 10 people. There's scarcity, right? Not everybody gets a chair. And you say to everybody, just, do creative visualization and visualize yourself getting a chair, and don't be in the scarcity of chairs, and you'll get a chair. That might work for one person, but it's not going to work for all 10. So the money system is similar to a game of musical chairs in that there's always more debt than there is money. So we're always in competition for never enough money. So I do think that a change in attitude and belief is important, because that's a reinforcing substructure of the money system that makes it seem normal and natural and reasonable to have a world of scarcity. Like the psychic climate justifies the economic structure. So I think actually both need to change, but certainly a key part of the change is changing the system by which money is rendered artificially scarce, which basically means no longer creating it as interest-bearing debt. And I could go more into the mechanics of that, but I'd say it's in the film and the book. So
hello and welcome to For the Wise.
I guess for now, I'll just leave it with the sense that we have that it doesn't have to be this way. And just to notice how pervasive, how ubiquitous the mentality of scarcity is as it accompanies money. It's like people who have more money, they're not even less anxious. You would think that they have no economic insecurity, but they worry even more than everybody else. And they're checking their portfolio every day. And what happens if the stock market crashes? And should I shift my investments from stocks to bonds? And like, as far as the actual insecurity and anxiety, the rich are not exempt from it any more than poor people are. Like, objectively, you would think that they would not need to be so anxious. But I mean, I have relatives who have 7-figure incomes, but are still constantly worrying about money and not buying organic oats because they're too expensive. These people are not actually rich. So the way I see it is that money embodies the energy of scarcity, which means that as you have more of it, you are not exempt from an experience of scarcity. And I think there's even a causal link here, because the more money you have, the less necessity you have to source your needs from other people in a relationship of gift, because you can pay for everything. And the one of the deep sources of our anxiety and our disconnection is disconnection. It is being able to meet all of your needs without having a relationship. So the wealthier societies on this planet have people who are shriveled in their relationships, who don't have any relationships except with immediate family and maybe a few friends, but they don't know their neighbors. They don't know their community. They don't know the trees and the soil and the beings around them. They're so cut off because they can meet their needs in the money economy. They're so cut off that they feel insecure, because real security only can come from intimate relationships to other beings, which disappear as we enter the money world. So there's a causal link there too. It's not just an abstract energy of scarcity that money carries.
I mean, I'd love to chime in on something that's, I continually wonder about, and as I look out and see and hear again, impact on the coral reefs, or how many % of insects are dead and are dying, and how many pipelines, they're still trying to put through. And for me, it comes to this question, which is both personal and the collective, which is, how much is enough, right? Like, how much is enough? How much is enough? I mean, like Charles was saying, I think with an individual to feel a sense of security that, okay, now I have enough, and that there's something within the current money system and the lack of intimacy that is what causes the sense of not enoughness. So it's not enough is symptomatic, in the same way that collectively, in the economic system powers a continual commodification of, the biosphere into more money. And as if suddenly, we'll have one more pipeline and then everybody's going to say, okay, now we have enough, we can stop. And I've been really struck by this relationship actually between abundance and limits. And this idea that unless there ever is such a thing as enough, or hitting such a thing, or being willing to be limited, then actually there's no such thing as abundance. You cannot be abundant if you have no limit, because you will continually grow to fill, and that scarcity, the hungry ghost of that, will continually, fill any more commodification or any more, say, quote, wealth that's generated. And so part of the other thread that, I've been really intrigued by is also, what is the function and the reawakening of village? Like, how does being embedded in a village context actually be the antidote in so many ways to this existential scarcity? The existential scarcity that, unless you have money, you will be cast out, or, homeless, or whatever it is, that is the thing that has people hoard and all the rest. And so in a way, and I appreciate this often about Charles's work, is, there's rare that I hear any sense of kind of blaming the individual in terms of a cynical fashion that I hear a lot of the wider commentary is. It's once again, this, humans are just greedy, or, humans, what are you going to do? They're flawed. Life would be better if, humans were gone anyway. The planet would be great without us, as if that's, an achievement to be cynical or a misanthropic about it. And I think that there's something in the willingness to both approach and to grieve actually where we're at, what's been done, the the arc of species that continually are exiting the planet right now, and the capacity to actually begin to make intimacy with, ourselves and others in a way that truly is a response to these times. Not shifting your perspective to manifest more, what you deserve and all the rest that I hear in so many of the, the get rich seminars and all those things. That again is a shade of what's actually the deeper longing, which is to be, in meaningful connection with other humans and the rest of life.
I absolutely see how money and the economic system has severed our relationships with community, village mindedness. Because if you can just buy your way out of things, then you don't need to rely on other people. You don't need to even be accountable to others. And the accountability piece is something I see just completely destroyed in this economic system, especially with how things are getting globalized. Hardly do you talk to the same person twice when you're calling for an issue regarding anything, like whether it's a banking issue or, going back to money again or insurance, any of these things. It's like we don't even have to be accountable to each other because we can just use money to separate from one another. And I see so much pain and trauma that has been created by this all around me, and also, through different conversations I've had on the podcast. I feel like this is really a foundational theme, and something that along these lines, something that comes up for me on a really personal level is how to navigate the gift giving and this new economy while also protecting oneself. Because it's really easy to idealize concepts of abundance and benevolence when it comes to money. But I also think we need to be honest that we are a very wounded culture that has been forced to operate within this very deceptive system. And unfortunately, the system has conditioned many to be manipulative and deceitful. So I would love to, if either of you could elaborate more on trust and boundaries and trauma within sacred economics.
Yeah. So we kind of have a dilemma here where we've monetized so many different ways of meeting our needs, and therefore distance ourselves from having relationships. And then if you want to go back and reestablish those relationships, we don't have the social structures to do that. Mm-hmm. We don't have the intact communities anymore. We don't have the networks of giving and receiving that are personalized. We don't have kids playing outdoors anymore and going into someone else's house to have lunch, like even that basic level of gift economy. So, you can't step back into it on your own. It's a catch-22. And also the internal habits and sensitivities that go along with gift culture that include when is an appropriate time to give or not to give. What is an appropriate gift? What is an inappropriate gift? This is a skill that it's an acculturated skill that develops over time in a healthy gift culture. And by a gift culture, I'm not talking about, birthday parties and presents and stuff like that. I'm talking about where the dominant mode of economic transaction, even transactions, not the right word, the dominant mode of economy is gift. So, and not just economy in terms of things that could be monetized, but the dominant mode of relationship is gift rather than barter or transaction or something like that. So yeah, we don't have the social structures for it, and we don't have the inner orientation or the skills. Mm-hmm. So given that, if we try to enact more gift in our lives, to be more giving, to be more generous, to let down some of the boundaries that we have erected in a world, and necessarily so, erected against getting ripped off. For example, you got to have some boundaries. When you don't just go to buy a used car and just trust the guy. Like, you have to be on guard. You go online to buy something. You have to be on guard. Is this the best price, or is this person ripping me off, and is somebody else giving me a better price? I don't want to get taken advantage of here. Like, those habits are inculcated by the society that we live in, and they are necessary habits. So and it's not even just economics too. It's on the personal level when we're distanced from each other and we instrumentalize other people, objectify other people, use other people for some personal gain, knowing that it's not going to come back to bite me because I can move on because we're not in a community and I don't have to suffer the effects of what I've done to another person because we don't have these tight social networks anymore and word isn't going to get out. And if so, that's okay because I'm going to move on and establish a new online persona, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we don't know how to do it really. And so when you step more into gift, you might find, hopefully you'll be like, wow, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what the appropriate gift is. Like that acknowledgement of your own skilllessness, that's a good step. Because otherwise you're going to open yourself to being taken advantage of, or you're going to have messy boundaries where you've given too much to somebody and unaware of the ties that are created by that gift, the dependency that could be created. Like there's a whole universe here of gift sensibilities that in modern culture is not well understood.
Yeah, it's quite a shift, and I think Charles said the inner orientation and the skillfulness to do so, because we are existing deeply in a hybrid time where, I've been deeply impressed by Charles's commitment to living consistently in the gift, or from offering the books and writings online as a gift to teachings and workshops and things where my understanding is as much as possible, as much as it's able for him to do so, that he invites that spirit of the gift. And I think what happens is that there's often a kind of confronting discomfort around this idea that people encounter, because it really confronts this idea of how does one value when they're not told what the value of something is. And then, if the onus becomes on them to be able to give for, is it quote a market rate? Is it how much something means to you, or how much it'll impact your life? Even something simple like, say, buying a CD, or they don't really have CDs anymore, but back when they did, imagine the cost value of the CD that, the artist that you loved, that you listened to maybe multiple times a day for years, versus the album that you maybe listened to once and you're like, oh, wasn't that great? But, the market says it's the same price. And so in a sense, it kind of flatlines the value of things, often by these economics of scarcity. And so the gift is such a different frequency change that it's something to step into, which I've attempted in different ways, and in a way, like invite the discomfort that comes with it. Both in the sense of, myself, let's say, being willing to trust, right? To trust that, say, if I offer this and I'm not telling people how much it's worth, will I be supported? Will it come back in some way? And at the same time, you're not doing it because of that, but it activates this deeper level of trust, which for me, and how I see it affect other people, is that is the kind of ripple effect where somebody truly changes. Because if you're in a transaction with something, literally, I think a transaction with money basically means once this transaction's over, we don't have a relationship. We're good, we're clean. Whereas often the gift comes with actual bind of some kind, and also, a kind of experience of uniqueness or potency, where, somebody can say like, wow, when you gifted me that thing, like I was so taken aback because I thought, I would pay for it or not, or like people are rife with stories about when they were gifted and how memorable that tended to be, and how much it meant to them. And so it really is a kind of mysterious unfolding, I think, about how it looks. And I think often if we get too caught in the kind of grandiose scalability of these kinds of ideas, then I think it can feel a bit overwhelming. Like, how would this mass scale, how would a whole nation operate this way, versus how would you operate this way with, just a close-knit community of people around you? Like, what would it mean to begin to lead into these edges, to reveal, even just relationship with money, how taboo that is for so many people? They say the two biggest taboos are sex and money, and how, how we share about these things and how we speak about them with others, they're either rife with, shame or guilt, shadow, and all the rest. And as we begin to unfold these places, we begin to heal our relationship, in this case with money, but also to those places of, scarcity, of unworthiness. And that really is where the system has to go that deep.
So I'd really like if you could share more on what these principles look like in action. So if there's those out there that are listening who want to begin to practice and question these skills, to give them some tangible role playing to see what that would look like.
So in the Sacred Economics book, most of the book actually is about how do we apply the principles of gift to a money system in a way that does scale. And there of the ones you mentioned, there are two that I think are crucial. And they come from a basic property of the gift. Well, a couple of basic properties of the gift. The first is that the gift circulates. In gift cultures, the kula ring in Melanesia, described by Malinowski, is the classic example. The gift of these necklaces and bracelets, they go from one island to another, to another, to another. And over a generation or two, they come back to where they began. It exemplifies the principle that the gift travels in a circle. You can see that principle operating in ecology as well, where anything that is created by one being becomes the food for the next being, and so on, until you have a self-sustaining loop. So, and in gift cultures, you do not hoard wealth. In a potlatch culture, for example, you temporarily might accumulate wealth, but even that, you're not actually accumulating wealth to hold the potlatch where you give it all away. You're accumulating promises to come to the potlatch with things that you can then give away. So you're building your connections. So this is a basic principle, though, of non-hoarding, of you can't keep it. That wealth in a gift society comes through being at a nexus of flow. So I thought, okay, how does this translate into money? Well, if you had money, instead of being able to hold it and bear interest, if you had a system where it lost its value if you held it, kind of a systemic inflation, then money would adhere to a basic property of the gift. And that's where negative interest comes in, which also is actually, so these things are coming up actually in the real world. On the one hand, at least in Europe, central banks are still having almost negative interest, in some cases actually slightly negative. There are like Swiss, if you buy a Swiss national bond, it's going to have a negative interest rate. So we're actually, and also the idea of a wealth tax, which is different than higher taxes on high income, but a wealth tax, something that affects wealth itself. Well, how do you do that? Do you have to inventory everybody's wealth? There's actually a really simple way to do it, which is to charge a fee on bank reserves. So, and I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but basically it means ramifies through the entire financial system. And basically it means if you have money in the bank, you don't get positive interest, you get negative interest on it. The money slowly evaporates. Just like in the old days, if you had a big store of grain and you didn't give it away, it would eventually go bad and you'd be left with nothing. So if you wanted to put that grain to good use, you would have to give it away. And those people who received it would know you as a big man, as a generous person, and they would feel grateful to you for having given them your excess grain. And so you'd have a secure place in society. So, and you would have everything that accrues to a wealthy person today, respect and power and so forth, but it wasn't through controlling and keeping, it was through giving. So anyway, long story short, negative interest rates on reserves translate into zero interest lending in the economy, translates into an economy that no longer needs economic growth for everybody to thrive, to have full employment and so on. So I go into a lot of economics in the book around that. And so that's one piece, one principle of the gift. And another principle of the gift is that when you give something, you don't have a guaranteed return. Like if I give you a gift, in a gift culture, I might have an expectation that you're going to give to me also. or that you're going to give to somebody else. Like, in a gift culture, I might give a certain gift to one person who never gives anything back to me because they're in that whatever father-in-law relationship to somebody else, and they give to that person. So you don't necessarily get a gift back from the person you gave to, and you don't specify what the gift is going to be. If I give Ian a birthday present, I'm not going to say, I'm only going to give you this if you agree in writing to give me a birthday present of equal or greater value. I could reasonably expect that if I start giving you presents, you're probably going to do the same. But I don't have control over the situation. Mm-hmm. So that leads to the second most important pillar of a gift-infused economic system, which is universal basic income. Mm-hmm. Or in the book, I called it a social dividend. And basically, you're saying, we're not going to withhold the means of survival subject to whether or not you are doing useful work in society. We're going to give you that. We're going to give you the means of survival. And we're going to trust that your basic nature as wanting to give to the world will come out if you are liberated to do so. And so this taps into a very different view of human nature. Mm-hmm. Classical economics says humans are motivated to maximize rational self-interest, and would say that if you didn't have to work, you wouldn't. If you weren't required to contribute to society, why would you? Why wouldn't you just sit back and play Mario Brothers every day and drink beer? Because you don't have to work, so why would you? That is, I think, a really distorted and inaccurate view of human nature. I think people are driven and deeply yearn to express their gifts in the world and to contribute to something meaningful to them. And that if we allow them the opportunity to do that, they will do that. Mm-hmm. So that's another principle of gift, is the principle of trust. Mm-hmm. It's the principle of not controlling the return, and which is one of the philosophical underpinnings of universal basic income. So I think that together with negative interest are the two most important key pillars of what I would call an ecological economy. And the one could be used to finance the other. So I mean, I could speak for hours on these, but I guess just to say that these intuitions and longings toward gift in the personal realm and on the community level do have a counterpart on a systems level. Mm-hmm. It has never been enacted before on a mass scale or a global scale. But I think that our transition is toward that kind of world where our best impulses and our spiritual leanings and our kindness and generosity are no longer the enemy of the systems that we live in, but the systems that we live in are an embodiment mm-hmm. of our highest aspirations. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I want to take what you just said, and I'm sitting with it, and I think about something that, Charles, I know you've written and spoken about extensively, and you as well, Ian, this idea of the old story that we're emerging from. And within this, I think something that almost everyone can, at least everyone listening, can relate to in this mass messaging that has taken place over several decades around this sort of formula to life, that working hard and sticking to the rules of the system will amass long-term benefits and financial stability, yada, yada. And I believe you referred to it as the, quote, grand project of civilization. But we know that this story is not true, and to continue feeding into it will also not make it true. But I can't help but think about how following this formula actually enables and strengthens imperialism, strengthens human supremacy and extractivism and patriarchal values. So this question around this transition, and I know a lot of names have been given to the unraveling of the old story and the recognition of our separation, terms like crisis, collapse, coming of age, and even rites of passage. So I'd really love if you two could elaborate more on where you see us in this transition from the old story to the new story, and what kind of crisis moments should we prepare for collectively?
I get curious around this idea of, linear progression, which seems suspect if you examine it. But the story of, I think Charles called it the story of ascension, I believe. The idea that, we started out as cavemen and, it's been a sort of fairly steady march towards more complexity, more high vibration, or, there's different models that essentially are saying somewhat similar, that it's, humans from the caves to the stars. And the problem with that, of course, it doesn't recognize that there's, many multiple worldviews coexisting, though the dominant one seems to have swallowed, many of the diverse other worldviews that have existed on this planet. And there's a seduction within that worldview that the dominant worldview is the only way it could be or ever has been for those that are within that system. And so in a sense, like anything, it's hard to see the water you're in until you're able to have a deep experience outside of it. And I think that, as the examples of this alternate economic system or ecological system, Charles was speaking to, for me, I feel there is this deep resonant kind of core, it's like you call it a core story or a core frequency, but that if we look at the, history of the human species and believe that based on, historical data and all the rest, that, for the most of it, we lived in nomadic tribes and various versions of village, that the kind of civilization project has actually only been a very recent development. And that it may be helpful to think of it maybe less even as a regression or sort of a return to what it, quote, was, even as many, collapses often think, but actually a spiral, right? A return, but also at a higher octave or a different octave, and incorporating all of the journey of separation, that Charles speaks to in his books, incorporating into where we are now, and now from a different expression. What does a deep recognition of interdependence look like now from a globalized society that has been, deeply affected by the ripples of colonization and extraction and all the rest? And I think we're starting to see it emerge in all these different places. And this is also why the phenomenon of emergence to me is such a powerful way of being able to understand this unfolding or this transition, that it's not a linear transition as well of sort of everybody all at once, all collapse all at once, or, we're all enlightened all at once, but that there's pockets of this future that are emerging everywhere, and pockets of this story, from Standing Rock and many other places where they're clearly sort of embodying this beacon of this frequency of deep interdependence, in this case from, indigenous communities that have thankfully been able to hold on to it. And so, I think all of us have these crisis moments, for many, and they maybe look somewhat different on a personal level as well, though obviously we're seeing it at the collective level, but whether from, rapidly shifting weather events to further economic turmoil and, the Loki that is in the presidential room, in the United States, that the crises can take many forms, yet the invitation seems to remain the same, rather than sort of buckle down, double down, return to what felt safe in a fashion that many are advocating. Rather see it as the invitation to step even more into this, story that wants to emerge, without certainty, though, that it will be successful. I think that's also the big kind of recognition of this time, is that there's absolutely no guarantee that, quote, it'll turn out for the better. And yet, I don't think that's necessary actually to be engaged. That's like saying that life's only worth living if you last forever. And I think, on a personal level, actually that it is precious because it doesn't last forever. And I think that there's something now in this time that we're willing to take steps or to lean into this story, for the sake of not just those to come, but that it itself is rewarding to do so now, to save the little patch of green that's still in your community, when it seems ridiculous, that's still worth doing now, despite the coral reefs dying, despite, all the rest. And so in a way, it's like, there's nowhere to get to that isn't possible to reach here. Although certainly the beauty of the expression that is possible, that we could see, is only possible if we're able to lean into it now.
Yeah, Ian referred to what I call the story of ascent, that narrates human history as this kind of triumphalist rise from the caves to the stars, from materiality to spirit, from the soil to the digital realm, it is pretty much the same story, whether you're talking about spirituality or technology. And it says that our destiny is eventually to become independent of nature, to become more disconnected, more separate. And so you can look at history as at least for the dominant culture, as one step after another toward that goal, where we entered into higher and higher abstraction and ability to abstract. For example, even the advent of language with nouns and representation, that was a step away from immediate experience of reality. Domestication, turning nature into something that is there for us. And then industry, and then the computer age. Each of these revolutions distancing us more and more from the rest of life and reality. And this, as you can see from the temporal distribution of these revolutions, they're happening faster and faster. They're accelerating exponentially. I just had a conversation, which I recorded with Daniel Schmachtenberger, who talks a lot about exponential tech and how in nature, the lion doesn't evolve faster than the gazelle. The lion evolves to be faster, the gazelle evolves to be faster, but they stay in a kind of equilibrium because their evolutionary mechanisms are the same. But with technology, the fish are not evolving as fast as industrial fishing methods. They can't catch up with drift nets and industrial trawlers and things like that. And more generally, the entire biosphere cannot keep up with exponential technology. So that necessarily changes our relationship. If we're going to have something called nature in the future, it changes our relationship to nature. No longer can we just, as a lion can, take to the best of our ability, knowing that everybody else will be able to take care of themselves. But we have to adopt a posture of stewardship or partnership that looks consciously at the effects of our actions. So this, I think, the nature of our transition or initiation is this. It's toward a reunion with the rest of life and with the planet that no longer externalizes it as it's just a source of resources, but understands that this is a sacred part of ourselves. Not necessarily where I diverge a little bit with Daniel Schmachtenberger is I do not think that exponential tech is necessarily an existential threat, that we're going to destroy the ecological basis of human life and we're all going to go extinct. I think that there's even a worse scenario, which I wrote about in my climate book, which is that we continue to kill the planet, but thanks to carbon-sucking machines and bubble cities and synthetic food and hydroponic factories and so on, that we maintain human life on a dying planet. So part of the evolution, part of the transition is away from the mentality of, are we going to be okay? Are we going to survive? That comes from the survival of the fittest attitude that says the important thing is ourselves. When you are in love with something, with a person, for example, the important thing is not yourself. If I love my mother, it's not because I think that I got to maintain a good relationship so I get my inheritance or something like that. That's not love. Love is I care about her because I love her. I mean, there's no reason for love. There's no reason that says, here's how I will benefit. So I think that the time has come to transition toward that relationship to nature, which other cultures had, and that we have forgotten in the ascent of humanity in this historical period of developing the technologies of control, which I think do have a purpose. We don't necessarily know what that purpose is yet, but when we consciously turn them toward regenerating and restoring what has been damaged and start asking different questions, then we will find the correct use for these technologies. The different questions being not how will we survive, but what kind of world do we want to live in? How can we take care of our relations? How can we be a healing force on this planet? Like those kinds of questions give birth to new applications of technology that exist today on the fringes. You know, there are people doing like amazing things in permaculture, for example. But we have not, as a culture, turned our collective attention and creativity toward that. There's still way more energy and money being spent on war than there is on ecological restoration. Yeah, so I think basically the initiation is into love. I hope that's not too cliche, but that's how I see it.
Oh, I don't see it as cliche at all. It's actually something that I feel very firmly in my own belief system, that in order for us to be sustained and driven in our missions for service, it has to come from a place of love, because otherwise, what's going to wake us up every day to stand and engage in this intense crisis? So I want to thank you both. And if there's anything that has been left out that you want to mention, I want to open up to either of you for any last thoughts while we're still together.
I just feel like, once I step into it, we could expand and expand and expand. I appreciate this conversation and your questions and this opportunity.
I'd love to leave the listeners with this image that's come to me and continually has me just reflecting on its possible, mystical applications. But if you're familiar with cymatics, which is, my understanding is essentially like it's a vibrational wave, often through like a sound frequency, and how you can find videos on YouTube now, right, where the researcher, or let's say DJ, will play a certain frequency, and that there'll be certain particles on a speaker that will assemble, or that whether it's water as well, will assemble into a certain orientation based on a relationship to the frequency. And in that sense, I feel like there's something in that with this idea of, what is love as a frequency? What is the form it takes in a natural fashion? Like, it's not something that the form, it needs to be, made happen by responding to the frequency, but in fact, they're deeply interrelated. They're one and the same. And how our kind of global unfolding, emergent unfolding, could be seen as a response or as a relationship to this core frequency that has been named here as love, but that it has a certain form actually that it will take automatically. Like if we are able to tune in and to surrender to this core cymatic of love. And so in this sense, it's not sort of a kind of open-ended, whatever somebody might feel like doing, let's say, because there's very real possibility, of course, that it is aligned with a frequency of fear or scarcity or egoism or all these ways, which, seen from a different perspective, are also those places in which we have been conditioned or wounded into not aligning with love, that I think at the core, every human being does want that, actually. But, again, for different ways of being interrupted in that created structures, inner structures in ourselves and systems that further wound. But if the capacity to deeply align with and surrender to that frequency of love, then the action becomes obvious. That to me is the core understanding of the intuition in this case, that we're actually tuning into that core frequency. And so that is what I just wish to leave the viewers with, to be able to develop the capacity to tune into that frequency of love and then just respond in a natural fashion to what they feel most called to do.